If it's at a later date, or if you would like to other people, please feel free to do so, and we will have information about when that will be up for you, so no worries about that. Otherwise, let's get started. So if we can hit that record button, please. Okay, everybody, to, again, the Millennial Grief Journey. This is an actively moving forward webinar, and we're so glad that you've all been able to join us today. Past Actively Moving Forward have done webinars, and we are very, very happy that we're able to bring them back to you and start a brand new series of webinars. And so, first of all, I'd like to kind of talk about a little bit about the wonderful things that have been happening here at AMS. So just we were actually acquired by a wonderful organization called HealGrief.org. If you have never heard of HealGrief.org or have never been to their website, please do so. I urge you to do so. They have a wonderful online social support network. And as it says here on the slide, it's for people who are grieving, bereaved, or those just wanting to support them. They have an amazing website with lots of wonderful tools for people, so please check that out. You'll also see that our website, Actively Moving Forward, has been integrated with HealGrief. So very lucky to have just an abundance of resources for all ages on that website. We as AF will continue to do the work that we are doing. So we are hoping to do wonderful programs, webinars, things like that, both for professionals, students, and community members. But really, we will keep our core mission, making sure that our students feel supported and empowered through their grief journeys. So we will continue to do that work as well. But we'd like to thank HealGrief for allowing this program to happen today and for making it available for everyone. And we are excited to talk about the Millennial Grief Journey, which is kind of a brand new beast that we're looking at. I'm Thompson. I'm the Director of Programming for Actively Moving Forward. I won't read through my bio. I'm the silly looking one down on the left side, crouching down there. Really kind of the big highlight that I want to go through today from my bio is that I'm so proud to say that I was a chapter leader myself back in 2008 at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, and then went on to become a child and family therapist. I work as a child and family therapist, but also work here at AMS, and I absolutely loved the work that I went through as when it was a program for myself. Completely believe it, and now I'm able to help other students go through the same program and constantly update it. Our students are really kind of our driving force on what they need and how this world works these days. So that really goes into who are these millennials they talk about. There are so many people, a lot of my friends included, who will say things like, oh, yeah, but you know, those millennials, and they'll go on to say something rather negative. And what I like to remind people is that millennials are age 35 and younger. And so I try not to share this, but I am 30 years old, so I'm still very much in this millennial grouping. And so I try to remind my friends of that as well. And you can see that they quickly change how they're talking about millennials when they realize that they, too, are millennials. So as you're working with college students, because this is really, I mean, this is all about millennials, but this is really focused on kind of that smaller subgroup of college students. When you are working with them, sometimes we need to recognize that we don't even know where we fall, and they might have misconceptions about millennials, not realizing that they also fall into that group. So it's important to kind of start things off. And one wonderful resource is Simon Sinek. He is a leadership speaker and does a lot of work on kind of the millennials in the workplace. And so there's one wonderful video called The Millennial Question, and it got such great reviews that he followed up. And so he did a second segment on that. These slides will be available after the webinar, so please don't feel the need to quick write down the YouTube links here, because they will be available afterwards. but just really interesting kind of insights into how millennials work, what we need to do to help them, but also kind of the service that the world has given them and kind of the different ideals that we have about things, generational gaps. How about the millennial misconceptions? I so much about this. I am so proud when I go somewhere to be able to say, you know, I work for Actively Moving Forward, and we put peer-led grief support groups on college campuses along with service groups components. And people, college campuses, you work with college kids? No. Yeah. And they say to me, oh, okay, great. Why are we having this like uncomfortable conversation? And I say, well, college students, I mean, that's just all partying and they just don't really care. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. This huge misconception about millennials. I hear things like they're so selfish, or they're looking in so many skills that we had to have when we were their age. They only care about themselves. They always want the easy way out. The biggest one I hear is all in bold in the middle of the page. They are so entitled. They're disrespectful, lazy. They don't take a chance to connect with others. All they want is handouts. And oh my gosh, what would they do without technology? They wouldn't know what to do with themselves. And I know that Actively Moving Forward, we work with exceptional students, but I really don't believe these things. There are always a couple bad eggs in the bunch who really give people bad names or stereotypes. This is really not what I'm seeing as an overall kind of view of millennials. I think it's easy to focus on the negative or to focus on things we don't understand and just quickly jump to conclusions. There are so many amazing things that this generation, these millennials, are doing. And really, they're the next leaders of our world. So we say all of these things about them, and we can feel this way about them, but shouldn't we be working to change the way we think and change the way we work with them so we can helping the leaders of the next world, or the next leaders, I should say, of this world, come together and really kind of figure things out and figure who they are and what they want to do. So a little more about millennials and the world that they're growing up in, and a little bit more about these misconceptions. So as it says, the generation is growing up during times of turmoil. I think if we look back, we can say that every generation has, whether it's been war, Great Depression, all of these things. The millennials are growing up in a world of terrorism. And that only changes how we look at life, how we go through life, but we have to really kind of see it from a different lens. And really, we're all, not just millennials, but we're all going through a time of terrorism. But think of how that shapes you as you're growing up. Flip side of this, the other side, is that this is also a great time of opportunity in this world. So you'll see here that there are spotlights on LGBTQ issues, women's rights issues, all of the different Lives Matter campaigns, and so much more. So this is really a time when so many things are on the spotlight. There are so many different causes that are really coming to light that people are saying, this is important, this matters to me, and this is something that I want to be involved in, which is a really, really great kind of time for change. And there are some people who say, I don't like any of those, and I don't want to be part of any of that change, and that's their thing. But think about all of these things that have maybe opened up or that are coming back into fashion, as silly as that sounds. Women's rights, this is not the first, decade that's been an important issue, but it keeps kind of turning around, just like other fashions. They keep turning around and they keep becoming popular again. Another here, unfortunately, is that millennials don't communicate, which we kind of saw. They don't connect. They don't communicate on the other slide, but they're communicating constantly. It's just evolving into a very different beast. So you'll see here, social media, text, phone, pictures, videos, these are all ways that they're choosing to communicate, whether they're communicating with friends, with people from the outside world. There are a million different ways that they're doing this. And I always laugh at the phone optional part because I have heard when people are holding up their cell phones and taking a picture of something, they're like, oh, somebody's calling me on my camera. You know, phones are definitely used for social media and other kinds of surfing, texting for sure, pictures and videos for sure, but phone is becoming a little bit more of a lost art. But in its place, we have things such as FaceTime and Skype and all of these other things. So we are seeing all of these different ways. And just because it doesn't look like it used to, just because, you know, I remember when I was at my friends' houses when I was little, and I have to remember phone numbers to call certain people. And we don't have to do that now. So these things are all changing, but there's still a lot of communication, if not more. I do see people on Facebook that, you know, I had toast for breakfast. That's probably more communication than we would have had with our friends back in the past. It just looks extremely different. So think about that in a different way. Even though you might say, like, I don't do social media or texting is not my favorite form of communication, that doesn't mean that it's not somebody else's. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Another is advocating is now the cool thing to do, which is probably not a very millennial kind of phrase to say. I'm not a very cool millennial, but it really is a cool thing to do. So you're going to see on social media or articles or however you're getting your news that there are ice bucket challenge. There are people reposting for causes that they believe in, maybe even doing short videos or doing campaigns for things they believe in. And the weird thing that I was figuring all out as I was creating this is that we have now grown up, millennials have grown up in a world where participating for run walks is not a new or different or weird thing, which is a little bit strange to say. So whether you go to a breast cancer awareness run walk, a Relay for Life run walk, something really pointed towards a charity, one thing. But there are all of these color runs, there are mud runs, there's these certain races and things like that. They all benefit charities, which is a really cool thing. So that's not the highlight of the run walk or the challenge race, but look into their missions. Most, if not all, will have some kind of benefit. I know some of my friends love to do Spartan races because it benefits a Wounded Warrior Project. So they are advocating in their own way. They say, I don't want to give money over the phone. I don't want to give money online on a website, but I'll do something fun with my friends and I'll raise money for them that way. So it's really cool that advocating is looking all the different ways. So we have to kind of think about what these people are doing and what that says about them. And lastly, mental health issues are being talked about openly to an extent. So everything takes time and everything takes a lot of great effort. But the wonderful thing that we're seeing is we're seeing the Royal over in England starting to talk about grief and mental health issues over the death of Diana. We're seeing other celebrities, whether they're in the U.S. or otherwise, coming out and talking about depression, anxiety, postpartum depression, all of these things. And now we can look at this one of two ways, and this is kind of going to be a theme throughout our webinar today. We can look at this as, oh, great, okay, they're talking about themselves and they're getting up on their soapbox, but also think millennials and think about the way that they communicate and what affects them. Living in a world where we are based a lot in social media, having a video of Lady Gaga talking about her depression and anxiety is sometimes way more impactful for young adults and college students and even below that than a doctor or some mental health professional coming on and saying, here's some information for you, here's some things to look out for. Having somebody that they look up to and that they know basically everybody knows, is a major, like it's just a huge thing for them. It's so great for them to be able to see somebody standing up for something they're privately going through that they can understand and then they can really kind of identify with. But at the same point, I do still hear in the therapy world a lot of, I really like that Lady Gaga did this, but I still don't want to tell my friends that I'm feeling depressed and anxious as well. So that's say this is to an extent, because this is a movement, but it's going to take a while. An unfortunate thing, or we can look at it as the start of something really awesome. Okay, so I have come up with a term called the compassion gap. And I think, we've started talking about the compassion gap, about different ways of looking at things. And when working with millennials, I hear a lot of times, you've heard some of the things I've heard, but I hear a lot of the times, like, I just don't get it. So that's what I'm calling the compassion gap, is when we're saying, I'm feeling a bit lost. So let's do a quick self-check. Only 3 questions here. Answer these in your head. I ask you to please answer them honestly, because you are the only one that's going to give your answer. So first, how would you feel if you posted something on Facebook and you did not get over 30 likes or kind of reaction? Got that in head? Something into a group chat that no one responds to. What will you do then? Feel if you do a really, really great job on a project at work and your boss does not tell you how much they appreciate all of your perseverance and talent for the job. What are your thoughts about that? The 3 questions here may seem a little bit silly, but many millennials, these things matter. These are of communication. These are ways of social acceptance. These are ways of feeling like we are worthy, that we're doing a good job, that we're on the right track. And again, whether you believe in these things or not, or feel the same way about these things that millennials do or not, this is an important thing to really kind of have in our brains of, wow, okay, this might be important to you. I don't get that, but I don't have to. So keep these in your head. I see the compassion gap as a Likert scale, right? 1 to 5, you're somewhere in the middle, you might be at the end somewhere. But the great thing about this is we have control over where our compassion gap is. If you want to have a bit of a compassion gap, that doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't say, oh, you shouldn't be doing whatever work you're doing. It just says you're your own person. But it's saying, wow, you know what, I may be at the high end of the compassion gap, and I want to close that gap a little bit. You have the opportunity and the means to move that bar so you are at whatever level you want. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on today, is how we can do that, what we can do, how we can work with ourselves, as well as college students or other millennials when talking about millennial grief journey. So let's a couple more symptoms of the compassion gap. So people might say, well, from those 3, I'm good. Like I don't feel like I have a big compassion gap. Let's talk about these other symptoms, because these are things that I think we hear most often. So the inner outward, like, what? Are they serious right now? That's what's upsetting them? If somebody tells you something maybe about Facebook, I put this on Facebook and I only got 10 likes. And you're like, well, isn't that good? 10 people liked it. And they're like, I have 300 friends. And you're like, oh, I don't know what to say to that. So these things can be thought and or said. Most times they're just thought or maybe said to a colleague or a different peer. But that can be a really, really big one. One thing, they just need to pull themselves together and get through this, or seriously, the real world is going to kick their butt. That's a lot when talking about college students, is people say, well, I'm not ready for the real world. we don't know exactly what they're ready for. We're only hearing part of the story, and maybe they're just having a really bad day, and that's what they have control over is nobody answered my thing in the group chat, and now I'm feeling really bad, like I wish I could have just taken it back. I wish I wouldn't have said it at all. The bigger things are happening in their world, but that's what they're focusing on. So personalization of, I never had this kind of support, and I turned out, so they will too. I urge you all to take yourself out of the equation when talking about somebody else's journey, whether it's a grief journey or just the life journey in general. Just because something worked for you doesn't mean it's going to work for someone else. We all have the wonderful, wonderful ability here in the United States to be our own individual person. I think is a freedom that we forget, we take for granted quite a bit, that we all process differently and all live differently, and that's okay, but we can't just lump them into a group and say, oh, they'll be fine. They just can't handle these things because they were coddled too much as kids, and they're still coddled too much. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this, and whether it's true or not, we have to meet them where they are, because you're not going to change somebody's mind just by saying, like, well, that's too bad, you need to get over it. That's really, I mean, when any of you ever been upset about something, had somebody say to you, you just need to calm down, and then you thought, oh, okay, now I'm calm, right? It doesn't work like that. We need the support we need when we need it, and if we can't get it, we might freak out a little bit. But we can also learn different coping skills. And sometimes we need somebody to teach us those coping skills because we don't have those from our past or even our present. So instead of about them as being coddled, think about their life differences, how we can help them through what they're going through. There's always issues as well. It's just her grandma. Things could be a lot worse. I actually heard this. I chopped it short, but what I actually heard was it was just her grandma who died. Things could be a lot worse. At least it's not her parents. And what the individual I was talking to didn't know is that both of the parents were incarcerated, and this young lady was being raised by her grandma for her whole life. And so just her grandma was a massive loss in her life. This was her caretaker. This was her person who helped her with financials, everything else. So don't assume that we know what's going on in the family tree. And loss should be bigger, smaller, more insignificant, less insignificant than anyone else's. A loss is a loss no matter what, whether it's a death loss or some other loss, which we'll talk about. But we should never minimize an issue that an individual is having. Finding faults, such as, wow, growing up in this world of technology, it has really stunted them socially. They need to get out there and make real friendships. And I talked about before, friendships look very different these days, or can look very different. Sometimes there are people that you have on Facebook that you haven't talked to for 15 years, but they're there, and you like to check up on them. Has anyone ever done that? You're like, I don't know why I'm looking at this person. I seriously have not talked to them in like 5 years. I don't know why I care. But friends can look very different. So we need to be able to kind of reframe our own minds. So let's talk working with this compassion gap a little bit more. I did put on here generational gaps, but I too am a millennial, and sometimes I feel it's compassion gaps, so it's not necessarily generational, but we do find more generational gaps where the compassion gap is a problem. We need to find the compassion that we need to work with these individuals that might have different values than we do. Some of our core values might be the same. For instance, I hear a lot of people say, we have the same spiritual values, but other than that, we don't have any of the same values. But let's do a couple of things. Let's find common ground. That's building rapport with the person, right? Just finding out about them in a non-judgmental manner and being like, oh, hey, I have a dog too, and that's really important to me, and that seems really important to this other person. You might not agree with anything else they're saying, but you found some common ground where you can have compassion for them as an individual. Taking yourself out of the mix is probably one of the hardest things that most people have to do, because we have internal dialogue that is constantly going. Whether we're brave enough to say what we're thinking or not, we have that different version of reacting instead of responding. So we may react in our heads after somebody says something, take a couple minutes and figure out the correct response instead of just blurting a reaction. We really do need to remove ourselves and say, okay, wow, this person is having a hard time with this. I don't know what that's like, but that's for me to know. That's just for me to be compassionate and empathetic towards. Taking the time to learn about their views and their lifestyles. A lot of people, especially I hear a lot of, LGBTQ issues. People get really scared. They don't know what the politically correct terms are. And so they try to avoid it altogether. The same thing happens with grief, right? So they say, I lost somebody close to me. And a lot of people will just say, I'm so sorry. They won't say, who? Who did you lose? They won't find out. They won't say, what was that person's name? One of the biggest things that bereaved people say is they miss hearing the person died. They miss hearing their name. And he wants to say, everybody thinks it brings great discomfort. Ask them, do you like to hear your dad Scott's name, or does that bother you? We'll know if we don't ask, and assume that it bothers them or it doesn't bother them is probably not the best idea. The more we ask about their views and their lifestyle, what do you do to cope with the grief of your dad? And they, well, I unfortunately have been drinking a lot. And just the reaction can shut somebody down. So take out of that mix and be like, really, do you want to tell me more about that? There are so many different ways that we can, and that sounds very therapeutic, I understand that, but there are so many different ways that we can react in a more accepting and compassionate way. And if we're just having a conversation with our friend who we can be like, let me tell you exactly what I think about that. That was a stupid choice, and let me tell you why, and here's what you should do next. We can't really do that in this situation. So that was to the next one. Don't assume you know what is needed. Just ask. We said ask about the person who died, ask about these details, ask about their lifestyle, but then say, what do you need? What can I do for you? Or what can this campus do for you? Or what can our organization do for you? However it works in your situation, ask. One thing most bereaved people say is, I don't really know. And that's where we can say, here are some things that we can do for you, or here are some options that are available to you in very simple steps. While our grief brain is on, process is not necessarily a strong suit that we have. And so we can just be like, I'm a little bit overwhelmed. I'm trying to figure out how to just get through my day. I don't know how different people can help me. Give them options, really tangible options that they can take with them. One, which we've talked through the whole thing about, is have empathy, not sympathy. Sympathy and empathy are completely different things. Having empathy is, oh, you poor thing. I feel so bad for you. This is so awful. Oh, my gosh. And I know many people who went to sympathy for them, but people who have empathy are in a different way. Having empathy is all about, wow, you are such a strong person, and strong may even be crying in the middle of the day. You've gone through something really, really difficult, and then I'm going to be here to help you. I understand your story. I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I get the whole grief thing, and I'm here if you want to talk about it. There's definitely a difference. If you don't understand the struggles an individual is dealing with, it is our responsibility, whether you're a professional, a student, a community member, it is just in humanity, it is our responsibility to open our hearts and help them understand that they're not alone, and to help give them skills, and I have put this in here to be a little corny, to keep actively moving forward in their grief journey. Okay, most people don't know 22 to 30% of college students are in the first 12 months of grieving the death of a loved one. That's a really big statistic. Take a minute to think about it. And this research was done in 2008. So our world in 2017, and that may have changed. I can guarantee you that it has not lessened. That large amount of people who are actively grieving. Another that I found important to mention, that 8 per 100,000 students take their own lives by suicide every year. Again, this was done in 2007. So 10 years later, think of that number. Take a minute, because the college student is grieving the illness or death of a family member. Think about what's actually happening on campus. Many campuses have to deal with students who are taking their own lives on campus. Some do off campus, but we've had a few reports of this happening on campus. Think about that affects the student body. Think of the body grieves, and think about what a shock that is when all of a sudden that comes out of nowhere. It's an issue. And the big question that we all have is, what does the campus do about it? How does it notify people what is available after a tragedy like this, and what is available long term for a tragedy like this? Okay, a little bit, most, if not all of you will know this, but I really love this picture and I wanted to use it. But we want to kind of go through, again, looking at 2 different sides of grief. The responses are experienced physically, cognitively, emotionally, behaviorally, socially, spiritually. I do want to just put out there that grief does happen in stages. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross many years ago once talked about stages of grief. Even she said, hey, I don't think those are really relevant anymore, years and years after she had published those findings. So the picture in the middle really kind of says, you know, went from this linear look of grief, of, 5 stages of grief, to how we see it now, which is why we always call it a grief journey. Because if we're talking about the 5 different stages, but you're looking at the picture on the right, you may stages or those different feelings multiple times. So it's more of a journey than anything else. It's trying to get out of dense woods into something a little bit more bearable, but we do that in our own way. Everybody's looks completely different. So negative things that we think about when we think about grief, I think just kind of come naturally to us. We always feel bad for people who are grieving. We always feel sad. We always wish that people didn't have to go through this. But really resilient animals. And that is the absolute wonderful thing about, who we are and how our brain works. So I want to look at the other side of grief. There are so many other things that come out of grief. And really, these were taught to me by our amazing AMS students. I see growth coming out of all of them. I see leadership, compassion, purpose, passion, and empathy from every single one of them, which is amazing. And their job is to help support and empower other grieving students on their college campuses. And they are just throw all of this around like confetti. They're throwing their leadership and their compassion, their passion, their purpose, their empathy, their growth to all of these other people. And yes, it is contagious, which is an absolutely wonderful part of these, this positive side of grief. is that they're all connecting and they're figuring out that they can grow through this and they don't have to grow through it alone. So as bad as we want to feel about this, there are some wonderful things that can come out of something terrible. A little bit types of grievers. When you're reading a lot of kind of grief literature, you're going to see two big ones pop up: intuitive grievers and instrumental grievers. Intuitive grievers are the people who would like to talk, share, and emote about their grief. Those are stereotypically people you will see in grief groups or in counseling. There are instrumental grievers. And instrumental grievers are people who want to do things. A lot of times I hear from these individuals, I talk about it, it's not going to fix it, it's already happened. What I want to do is I want to make a difference. So these are people to do things. A lot of times we'll see them volunteering, coming up with, different memorial run walks, things like that. They're really active in their grief. I'd like to just stop there. Full self-disclosure, I see a lot of both inside myself. And so I do believe that there are many types of grievers, but this is just two ways to think about, wow, if somebody wants to talk and another person comes into you and says they're grieving and they don't want to talk about it, I don't want you to take it personally and think, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? We need to understand that when people have, their grief journey, there are different ways about it that we might not really think about in the very beginning. So give different options for multiple ways of grieving. We're not just saying, there's a support group, and if you want, there's also counseling, and give them a whole host of different options that they can choose from. A little types of losses, we won't spend too much time on this. Death losses, these are just things to consider that we kind of talked about beforehand. So relationship to the person who died, we talked about, please do not assume that you know the family dynamics of this group, and please just ask questions, talk about their life, talk about, what was going on, who was this person to you, can we say their name, tell me about this, what do you want to share with me? This is between sudden or anticipated death. Both are hard, but there's shock value versus a level of acceptance. And so we need to see where that is as well. So let's say an accident is a sudden death. Anticipated death may be a form of cancer, example. So think about, that doesn't make it easier one way or another. If you have time to prepare, that does not make grief or the death of that person easier. It make it a little bit different for one's grief journey, but we can't assume that it makes it any easier. So ask and figure out, was it sudden, was it anticipated? How are you feeling about all of that? How are you processing that? What's going on? And the person died is another thing. I hear people say, oh, well, their parent died when they were 7, and they're in college now, so why is it still an issue? Our grief never goes away. There's one thing that, if you take anything from this webinar, and it's only one thing, please know that grief never goes away. It changes and grows with us. And we always say, hopefully down the road, it packs a little bit less of a punch in the face. But even when they have the death of a parent at age 7, can be struggling while they're in college. Think about how different their life may be versus a student who might have 2 parents who are living. Always different things that we need to think about when we look at a student. We need to look at them as a whole person. There are also secondary losses. You can see some of the secondary losses here. So we need to think about if they're at college and all of a sudden a parent dies, for example, maybe they don't have a home to go home to anymore. Maybe the financial support they were getting is completely gone. And you'll see some of these other things too. And the last one I really want to highlight is, this goes with when the person died. Whether the person died when the child was 7 or when the student was 19, there are still milestones that that student is going to reach, that that loved one will no longer be there for. And that's why it doesn't matter when that person died. It matters that life is forever changed and have to deal with those things as they come. Grief never goes away, it just changes. Here's some unique issues for college students. Campuses foster some good things, but also some very hard things. So there's disenfranchised grief. You know, there are peers saying, aren't you over that yet? Like, that happened a long time ago. Different relationships might come with disenfranchised grief. So there might be a stepmom who dies, and somebody's like, well, it's just your stepmom. It's not that big of a deal. So all those different relationships, even significant others, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, people are like, oh, well, I mean, it wasn't that serious. They were just your boyfriend or just your girlfriend. That's not necessarily true. Important choices happen at college. Career choices, money choices, work choices, what's your major, which is just like the biggest choice when you're in college. Think about having to make those important life choices while your brain isn't necessarily functioning to its fullest. That's really hard. You're making life choices that are going to affect you for many to come. Not saying that those things can't be changed, but sometimes they can't. That you're making on a brain that is a little bit off, a little bit off kilter. That's pretty. And then grief. You can read, there's tons of information on complicated grief, but two that we want to highlight are when grief may not get the attention and or resources that are needed, and the student feels very alone and isolated, those can be issues. There can also be maladaptive coping skills that really kind of go along with this functional parent, so they're not doing well in home, work, school, any of those parts of their lives that can really affect their grief journey. You'll see on the right-hand side many different effects that college can have on a grieving student. And all of these things are really, really important aspects that need to be addressed. So I hear from college students, and it is comical for a reason, because humor is a wonderful thing to use in grief. And they say, well, college students don't grieve, right? Because, like, we're, like, over that. And it's like, oh, yeah, you kind of wish you were. But research actually shows that most people will not go in to see either a medical doctor or a mental health professional for grief. Many times they will go see them for insomnia, lack of motivation, inability to concentrate, or anxiety. So these can definitely, grief can look many different ways and can be masked in many different ways. And that's why we really need to kind of ferret out what's going on in their lives. So we can say, is it just anxiety? Is everything else in their life wonderful, but they just have some anxiety? Or are there some other things going on? Think what the resources in your community look like. What I hear from most people are three things. Well, we have hospice, we have counseling, and we have a grief center. And that's when I ask counseling, they'll say, oh yeah, like we have some resources on campus, and I'm sure that there are resources in the community. I don't really know those, but I know that there are some on campus. One I just heard from a student the other day is, yes, we have counseling on campus, but they have a 3-month waiting list. Wow. I think that has for students. My question is to you, how are you, the college students, know that you're there, whether you are a student yourself or a professional or a community member, and how are you going to help remove the stigma of seeking help? Because there's a massive stigma, right, for all ages. There's a massive stigma for going to counseling or going to programs for hospice or a grief center or whatnot. So think, have a plan. A little bit about grieving online. I think we all know that many people grieve online. There are many different ways to do so. A lot of the time it's social media. So people say, why must everything be documented? And you're going to see this is the main form of communication, which we talked about. And this is actually a purposeful action. They are trying to express themselves, and this is the way that they know how to do that best. It all speaks to what's really important to them. Like I was saying earlier, somebody posted on Facebook, like, I ate toast this morning. For some, they wanted to share that. That was important for them to share. They wanted others to know. But with grief, that's all the truth. That people will post, you know, oh, this is me and my dad back in 2008, miss him so much. I see that so much popping up on my social media. These are things that people want other people to know they're going through. Support systems can be expanded when you grieve online. There may be some people following you or liking you or being, you know, friending you that you have no idea and you've never met before, but they get it. They understand. Maybe they've gone through something similar and they offer that support that maybe they don't get as well. So those support systems can grow a lot, which can be actually a really healthy thing. It's not a thing, but it can be healthy. And then how one individual fits in, they try to stand out because the whole idea is they want to leave their mark on the world. The biggest thing with millennials right now is how am I going to leave my mark on the world? So I say to you, if we can't beat them, let's join them. Let's figure out healthy resources for them to be able to really grieve online. So we have some here for you. Of course, I have to do a plug for HealGrief.org. They have amazing resources on their website. And then Sanctuary, which is an app on Facebook, which is all about grief on Facebook. And then have great websites such as HealGrief, Too Damn Young, Slapped, HealGrief, amazing resources. And those are just highlighting some of them. There are plenty more out there. Here's just a couple of them that I want to highlight. The reason I'm highlighting some resources over others is not a preference. It's just because these are the things that I'm hearing our students are going to the most. And so I take a lot of this information from our students and I go, okay, if this is important to you, like that you really like these sites, they do really well for you. So that's why these are up. I don't mean to exclude anyone. Please take a look into all of those. They are great for many different ages, not just and college students. Okay, I think, you know, we know a lot about grieving offline, what these things might look like, and we're, again, doing kind of the flip side. It might look really on the positive side, volunteering, starting up AMS, using different expressive arts, advocating, attending a grief group that's already on campus or even in the community. But this is it might look like substance use, isolation, academic struggles, poor work performance, unhealthy life decisions, or avoidance of grief altogether. So difference for grieving offline or online, they both have positives and they both have negatives. So that's what I wanted to highlight, is there's no right way to grieve, but it's just how we do it in a healthy way, whether we're online or offline. So let's figure this out together. That's the whole reason we're here, which is really what I like to call the Millennial toolbox. We're giving multiple coping strategies that will help them to have healthier life transitions. Isn't that said in like just kind of a positive light? When we're really saying like, oh my gosh, you don't know what to do? Here, let me give you things to do so you can feel better, so that your grief journey goes a little bit better so it doesn't totally suck all the time, which is what I hear from a lot of people. So when we're doing this, when we're having healthier life transitions, we are helping to decrease health risks and possible mental health issues. So great all the way around for everybody involved. Three things that I want to highlight here are the Millennial toolbox is made of leadership, connection, and communication. Ourselves is the process of owning our own story. It's the bravest thing we'll ever do. Love Brene Brown. If you haven't heard of her, she does a lot of great things, especially her books are absolutely wonderful, that are really great for grieving people as well. They're not necessarily about grief, but easy to connect to. A little support groups. I think a lot of us know that, you know, in this world for grief, there's a lot of resources, but a lot of them are support groups. So this is a chance for people to have a new support system in communities. They may have gone off to college, and that might be really far from where they live. So geographically, the support systems have shifted, or maybe they were just unhealthy to begin with. So this gives them new opportunities and new people to connect with. Allows for a chance for shared experiences, so it decreases that isolation that a lot of grieving college students feel. And then it really increases our understanding that we are never alone in our grief journey. I hear so many people say, I don't really think that whole 1 in 3 college students is grieving the illness or death of a loved one. I don't think that's true, because everybody I talk to is like, no, I'm good. But really, when we have a safe place where we can find other people who are dealing with similar things that we are, it's amazing how connected we feel. And then if there's the mutual aid, knowing that support doesn't mean something's wrong with you because you look around and you're like, it doesn't seem like anything's wrong with the other people in the room, so maybe nothing's wrong with me. It's not just support from one individual, maybe one counselor or one friend, which is wonderful for some people, but some people need more perspective, different views, things like that. And so support groups really pay attention to that. What does leadership look like? So leadership was one of our big things, right? I call this the leadership spark. And it's a trait that can be learned to help advocate, support, and empower for oneself or for others. And so this is why we say it can also have positive effects on grieving peers. So not everybody craves leadership, but we all lead in our very own ways. And even if it's just for ourselves, if it's not for other peers, there are some people who are very introverted, and there's nothing wrong with that. But having leadership for yourself, being able to advocate for yourself, being able to find the ways that are going to support yourself, and then figuring out what is going to empower you in your own life is going to be really important. So some you want to connect and get really involved. Some may just want to focus on themselves, and there is no wrong way to do that as long as there's some kind of little leadership spark, so we're taking control of our grief journey or helping others find the path to theirs. Making the connection. One thing I have people say to me is, that's a good coping skill, but I'm actually not going to use it because I don't feel comfortable with it. Or, oh, yeah, I could go on that app or that social media site, but I don't feel comfortable with it, so I'm not going to do it. So be open with the people that you're working with and say, some kind of cool strategies that I learned about. Give them the ideas, let the brainstorming start, but then them come up with the rest. What do you think? What are some ways that you think, with the things that you do in your life that would make sense for you? So that's going to be really, really important for them. Their own pace. It's also really important. We don't know what they're going through, how they're going through it, and when they're going through it. But giving the space to do that is a thing. Also validating it. They could have done something very small, but maybe that was a major step for them. Validate and say, wow, I noticed that you did that. That was pretty cool, because I don't know if you would have done that before. That could give somebody the power, the empowerment, I should say, to maybe make the next step. Wow, somebody noticed that I actually did something good, so maybe I'll continue to do that. And then what they're passionate about and work with that to their advantage. And so one thing to remember is that depressive symptoms that may come along with grief can dull interest. So just as we said that the grief brain is not firing all pistons, artists may not be as strong just because we kind of have those depressive symptoms sitting on the top with our grief every once in a while. So really try to reignite those passions. And then we're going to go back to the basics here because that is really what's needed. So I ask you, have you ever stumbled on your words when taking a chance talking to someone? That can be just any time in your life where you're like, okay, I'm going to get up my confidence to talk to this person. And then you stumble over your words and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just did that. But my question is, were you grieving at the time? Or were all of your pistons firing? that'd be even more than a deterrent to people to say, wow, I don't feel like I'm at the top of my game, so I'm really not going to try to communicate with this other person. So a student with some ways to approach peers, even things they might say to start things off with. That sounds like the next bullet point down. It sounds like it could be insulting, but really that's not what this is. This is just like, hey, I'm going to start the brainstorming, just like we were talking about with the coping skills, and you can take it from there. I'm going to give your brain a little bit of a break because not firing on all pistons, and then you can figure out how you want to deal with it from there. You totally disregard everything I'm saying, and that's fine, or it'll come and be useful to you at some point. This is not somewhere where you usually get a lot of gratitude. This is something where people are like, oh, I should know how to do this, so I'm just going to kind of keep quiet about it. But you could have helped them tremendously by giving them these skills of communication. Here are some other skills for working with the bereaved. I think you see here that there's a lot of things that we've been able to talk about today. One thing that we haven't talked too much about is to not share your own story. So every once in a while, sharing your own story can be helpful, but we tend to be self-centered creatures as humans, and so sometimes our story can get then the front light, the spotlight, and they're going to be like, okay, I guess I'm done talking about my stuff. Or there might be some kind of comparison, like, oh, well, maybe theirs is worse than mine. And like we talked about before, there's no worse, there's no better. Grief is grief. So just be careful on how you do that. And remember tangible support, even if you have, certain websites that you can send to them via email, or you can give them paper documents of things. Our grief brains might not remember everything that we're told. There's also finding a new normal. So that is a huge thing that can be really difficult to do. I encourage people to continue or to start rituals or traditions that keep them connected with the person who died. There's continuing bonds theories that say you can still talk to that person even though they're not there, and that doesn't make you crazy. That just is an okay thing to do to continue that bond with that loved one. Finding new ways to keep living in spite of the losses that we've collected can be a really, really difficult process. So again, don't put a clock on that. It is definitely a fluid process that we go through. And you're going to see, again, the different things that come from a new normal, things that will increase, things that will decrease. We always want to look at both sides of each argument, but think of all the little things, but all the hard things that can come with it as well. Okay, professionals who are on this call, there's grief beyond the student. There are things we can do. So do your research, learn policies that you may or may not have on campus, educate faculty, staff, even residence assistants. They are ones who live in the dorms and apartments with these students. Create and find resources for non-bereaved peers so they can be more empathetic, they can be more supportive, and they can have more education on grief. And then we would love to ask you to help us gain more AMS advocates on your campus or in your community. And those are huge things that can really be safe places for grieving students to go. All right, first highlight that I want to give out, this is both for professionals and for students and for community members. The co-founder of AMS, David Fagenbaum, wrote this wonderful book with one of our Board of Mental Health professionals, Heather Servati-Seib, and this is amazing stories about college students who are grieving, and I think this is a wonderful way, if you're wanting to do continued research on this topic, this is a wonderful way to really get in the heads of individual students and figure out what they needed, what was going on with them, what was healthy, what was not so healthy, what helped them, and really to kind of, learn more perspectives from it instead of just my perspective and just what I've heard. So I encourage you to go find that. That website is from the publisher, and it is also on Amazon. So you can always buy it through Amazon Smile, which helps out nonprofits. Okay, we always say, we are actively moving forward. We are here because we get it. We get the whole grief thing. just that the more you do and the more education you have and the more support and empowerment you give to grieving students, they're to you because you did it, which is a pretty wonderful thing. And that was brought to you by Actively Moving Forward, which is a HealGrief program, we are proud to say. And one thing I want to do really quickly before we sign off, I know our hour's up, but I do want to just quickly go over if we have any questions that we can answer for everybody here. If you have any questions, please feel free to put in our chat box or our Q&A box. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have at this time. And please also know that I am available at any time you would need me. Hopefully you have my email, but if you don't, it is Kiri, Kiri-AMS @HealGrief.org. And I'm happy to answer any questions or have any conversations that you have out of this webinar. So if you should need anything else, because I don't see any Q&A at the moment, but please feel free to put it in if you'd like. Other than that, have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Millennial Grief Journey. Thanks, buddy.